Mas não sou só mesmo.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Before we actually begin, I would like to tell you that this webinar is being recorded so that we can keep a record of the event and share it later with subtitles for accessibility and wider reach. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, The Recomposition of Human Rights in the Anthropocene, Global South Perspectives. This event is sponsored by the Human Rights Commission of the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences and by the Anthropology of Public Policies and Development, Practice Commission, also within the IUAES. It is co-sponsored by the Best Practices for Epistemic Justice Research Group from the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation in Brasília. Raquel and I are very pleased to welcome you today. We've been working together in this organization, bringing into dialogue our shared concerns with human rights, anthropology, public policy, environmental transformation, and global South perspectives. I'm Gretel Echazú Böschemeier, an anthropologist and researcher at Fiocruz Brasília, and a member of the IUAES Human Rights Commission. My work engages with health, human rights, epistemic justice, decoloniality, and the participation of historically marginalized communities in knowledge production. And Raquel, what about you?
Hello, everyone. I am Raquel Assunção Oliveira, a researcher at the National Institute of the Semi-Arid Region, INSA, a Brazilian research unit linked to the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. I am part of the Best Practice Collective Research Group, and my main areas of interest and research involve the epistemology of science, philosophy of image, visual culture, and the dissemination and popularization of knowledge. We would like to begin by acknowledging Saptrati Bairagi, chair of the IUAES Human Rights Commission, for his support and for his role in strengthening this collective space of reflection, dialogue, and engagement around human rights within anthropology. We also express our sincere thanks to Indrani Mukherjee from the Anthropology, Public Policy, and Development Practice Commission for her generous collaboration in making this event possible, and for helping us build bridges between human rights, public policy, development practice, and anthropological debates. Today, we will have 6 speakers who will each briefly present a case or conceptual perspective related to our discussion. After the presentations, we will open a space for cross-dialogue among the speakers, followed by audience Q&A.
Please, for those attending, feel free to write your comments or questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. You may write in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. We will collect the questions and comments and bring them back to the speakers during the end of the discussion. This webinar brings together colleagues from different regions and intellectual traditions to think about human rights in a time marked by ecological crisis, inequality, violence, displacement, and profound transformation in the conditions of life. Our intention is to discuss human rights as an institutional language, but also to ask how they are being reimagined, contested, and recomposed from situated experiences, especially from the global South. We are grateful to all speakers and participants for joining us today, and we hope this conversation will open a generous and rigorous space for exchange. Now we will invite Dr. Reuter to give his opening statement, and we will read before his mini biography.
So, and are you going to introduce me or am I introducing myself? I'm
We
introducing
are
myself.
introducing you if you
Okay.
allow.
Hi, Thomas. So, everyone, Professor Dr. Reuter is an anthropologist at the University of Melbourne with a research focus on transformative social change, existential risk, food systems, and sustainability. He is on the board of the World Academy, a fellow of two European academies, past chair of the World Council of Anthropological Associations, and a former executive of IUAES and the International Science Council. He's an advisor to international organizations and national governments and has published 17 books as well as more than 150 articles.
Okay. Thank you for your very generous introduction, Raquel. And well, I would just like to say that since I'm also with Indrani representing the Commission on Public Policy, I want to take a little bit of policy approach. And I think there's two factors that I think are shaping human rights in the Anthropocene, and it's all kind of connected. And one of these is in economic policy, the doctrine of neoliberalism that has been with us since the time of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, so around 1980. So we've had, 46 years of neoliberalism at least. And well, we're seeing the results of that. One of the results is growing inequality. And I'd just like to say, show me where the global south is. And I'm just I was thinking about the theme, and I was reminded of a webinar or a seminar we had at Melbourne Uni the other week from someone who was doing research in Detroit on homeless people. And to me, that side of Detroit is part of the global south. So, what I mean is there's vast inequality. There's a decline of the middle class in many Western countries, or the so-called developed world, or the global north. So there's a lot of inequality there. And of course, it's much more acute in the south. And poor in the south is much more dangerous in many cases. So there's also an international inequality between countries, and that's the other it's not neoliberalism, it's neocolonialism. And the two are, of course, linked. It's part of the same project. And I work here in Indonesia now. I've been working here for 35 years. And I can only say that colonialism was briefly disrupted after independence and after World War II, but continues unabated. So there's continuous foreign influence and exploitation, and a lot of the injustice we see around the world is part of that product. A product that's now in a state of flux, in a very dangerous stage. I run a website called Extra through the it's www.worldacademy/extra on existential risks. So we monitor, and this just to show where being an anthropologist can land you in the end. So we are an info hub monitoring existential risks around the Anthropocene constellation of threats, the change, and so things like inequality, misinformation, and geopolitical risks, nuclear war, and so on. So the whole spectrum of existential risk. And a lot of it has to do with the Anthropocene. There's the fact that for, maybe 100 years at least, we've been living well above the carrying capacity of planet Earth. And the last 50 years of neoliberalism haven't helped, because that policy is all about profit maximization, and there hasn't really been a serious interest in addressing and mitigating some of the risks that are associated, the planetary risks associated with the Anthropocene, and the social risks, the social lack of sustainability, that is also part of that system. And I think the two are very closely related. And that's where you come then into the question of human rights. Of course, people in the global south have not contributed to climate change, for example, in any significant way, but they're often the ones who bear the greatest weight and have the least resources for adaptation. So there are dramatic injustices when it comes to these existential threats. And human rights, of course, the most fundamental right is for food and shelter. I've worked for the last 10 years on food systems, sustainable food systems. And again, I found the same pattern. It's not just about sustainability in the normal sort of ecological sense, but also in the social sense. So I've observed, for example, how the COVID crisis triggered a food crisis, similar to the Iran war now that is about to trigger the most horrific food crisis from all I can see coming. And yeah, so in the COVID crisis, obviously there were a lot of casualties on account of the virus, more so in the global south, of course, but few people know that a greater number of people died from the consequences of food shortages because of disrupted supply chains and rising prices in countries, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. So the food crisis actually killed more people than the virus itself. So that's the way I sort of approach human rights. So that's the way I connect to that theme. For me, it really is about inequality and injustice, both at the national level and also between countries. And what can we do about it? Well, I think this system of governance that we've had, both on the global level, neocolonialism and neoliberalism, are bankrupt. I think neoliberalism is discredited on a discursive level, though it still endures in practice. And colonialism, well, we see right now on the news, I don't need to detail this very much, but we see a desperate attempt by the West to cling on to its colonial dominance in another form, of course, through, acts of aggression. And I think that system is on the brink of collapse. And it'll be very interesting to see what the Global South actually does. And I think there's a chance for people in the Global South now to stand up for their rights and to help shape a new world order. And it's very interesting that a country like Iran can actually face up to the world's #1 superpower and stand its ground. Whether we agree with the regime or not is a different matter, but it shows everybody that you can stand up and fight for your rights, fight for your sovereignty, and that will go a long way to addressing human rights issues everywhere. And of course, in this time, who cannot think of Gaza and now South Lebanon and the horrific genocide that's unfolding there? And, in the human rights perspective, we are in a state of lawlessness, both in, international law is being dismissed in this struggle to cling on to power. And yeah, so to even think about human rights, it's impossible for me to not. The image of the destroyed cities in Gaza just pop into my mind, whether I like it or not. It's just horrific. And yeah, so the legal framework is really in tatters, and we'll have to start again. People talk about the need for UN reform, particularly the Security Council, or maybe even starting a new organization. We've just had the amazing fossil-free future summit in South America, which is really indicative of this step of saying, no, we're not going to keep talking with indefinitely with people who are going to keep polluting and want to sell their oil. We want to move forward without them and have a coalition of the willing. So you can see there's all kinds of new formations to get away from the paralysis of the COP process. And similarly, I think BRICS on a political level is an attempt to break free from that system of oppression and inaction and indifference to the future of humanity. So really, I think that's the time we live in. And I think, yes, human rights is a very important rallying point. We've had, for example, recently the decision by the International Court of Justice on the duty of nation states to protect their citizens from climate change. That's very much a rights-based approach. And it's had quite a large impact. But anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm looking forward to hearing your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Thomas, co-chair of Commission of Anthropology, Public Policy and Development Practice, for these opening remarks and for helping us frame the importance of this conversation. I now invite Ana Gretel to present the conceptual framing of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Raquel. I will just take a few minutes to continue the introduction of our conversation today. The starting point is quite simple, but also challenging. Human rights are changing. They are being reconfigured in the context of the climate crisis and also in the context of new and very unequal forms of climate governance. Historically, we have often thought about human rights through the language of states, laws, treaties, international institutions. Of course, those frameworks remain central, but today rights are also being claimed, practiced, and reimagined in other places, territories, social movements, community-based practices, and in struggles for land, water, forests. So one of the questions guiding this webinar is, what happens to human rights when they move across different scales, from international arenas to local territories, from legal documents to everyday practices, from human-centered frameworks to more relational ways of understanding life? This is why today we are also interested in more than human rights. Those debates challenge the idea that only human beings can be subjects of rights. This question is especially important from the perspectives of the Global South. Indigenous and traditional peoples, Afro-descendant communities, family farmers, youth, and women are often among the most affected by climate change. Those communities are not only victims of climate impacts, they are also producing concepts, practices, and political languages that expand how we understand rights, justice, and governance. So our objectives today are to examine how human rights are being reconfigured across formal and informal arenas of climate governance, to explore emerging frameworks, including more than human rights and the tensions they create within existing legal and political systems, and then to highlight territorial and community-based practices as important sites of innovation in climate governance. With this framing in mind, I'm very happy to move into our conversation today.
Thank you very much, Ana Greta. Thank you. For those attending, Please feel free to write your comments or question in the chat or in the Q&A box. You may write in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. We will collect the questions and comments and bring them back to the speakers during the discussion. I would like to introduce our first invited speaker today, Dr. Seema Purushottaman. She's an ecological economist and the current president of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. She's retired from Azim Premji University, Bengaluru in 2025 and continues as adjunct senior fellow at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. Seema engaged with various academic programs and network with transdisciplinary solution-oriented focus and organizations at the grassroots. Seema's current projects include educating indigenous youth and why and how to secure and manage their community forest rights and showing how ecological insecurity is a multidimensional inequality. The title of her presentation is Ecological and Livelihood Sovereignty as Human Rights of Forest Dwellers, the case of India's Forest Rights Act, 2006. Please, Seema, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here for a couple of major reasons. One, I always believed that South-to-South dialogues were missing in the global discourses. And second, when such discourses happen, the South within the South, as Thomas was indicating, the South within the North, even within the South, we can differentiate North and South from a development spectrum. So these trying to tease out from the diverse parts of Global South gives me a lot of learning opportunity in this webinar. And I would like to know what is the time for me to present? Is it 10 minutes?
Hey, 10 minutes, Seema.
Yeah? Okay. My presentation is titled Ecological Sovereignty and Livelihood Sovereignty as Human Rights for Forest Dwellers in India, and in the perspective of landmark legislation that was passed in the year 2006 by Indian Parliament. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for many years, around 8 decades, India has seen affirmative action towards the rights and welfare of indigenous people. My focus, as I was indicating, was the South within India, the most marginalized communities in the country. In various provinces, the proportion of their population varies from 1.5 to 80%. So in certain provinces, they are very important and visible, but in certain others, they are not. So the affirmative action towards the indigenous rights and the welfare of indigenous people meant right to food, right to education, right to healthcare, even right to employment. And these days, you always also meet with them using free or subsidized farm machinery, even beginning small enterprises with venture capital, and even the rightful access to forest producers and marketing. But over these 8 decades of affirmative action, what we also see are blind spots. It is erasing what is their socio-cultural and ecological strengths, and at the same time, not really taking them to the mainstream societal economic advantages. For example, individualization as a precursor for development privileges or the policies, then the need to follow the mainstream institutions, the need to follow the mainstream epistemic formulae, then the education, the occupations, the food, lifestyle, governance, etc., are being mainstreamed in the interest of what is known as a rights framework. And still, integration with mainstream society is at large for India's indigenous population. Next, please. So the question is, what is indigenous human rights today for the South within India? Is it dignity and self-reliance in nourishing oneself and one's family? Highlighting the traditions of social and cultural institutions and also livelihoods? And is it actually complementary to being passive recipients of affirmative development action in various domains, maybe healthcare, maybe employment? If so, let's look at the next slide. So what happens is most tribal belts, what we call as forest-dwelling tribes, they are the beneficiaries of free food, shelter, healthcare, education, and employment. But what is coming into a very visible impact is that most of them have undergone multiple displacements in their own lifetime. It could be for dams, it could be for protected forest areas, it could be for mining. And then due to that kind of a very displaced lifespan, they also fear for life because of insecurity added from climate vagaries to wild animal and human conflict. And of course, they are still at large. You can't find them much in the mainstream jobs. Physical and psychological health is, deteriorating. I mean, of course, it's fair to say that maternal, mortality and infant mortality have been declining, but there are other indicators of health and welfare they are dwindling. And the most important thing, as I indicated, is the detribalization or individualization, which means cohesive social fabric is kind of disintegrating, which diminishes the social capital and a voice, an agency from these marginalized South within India. This is in spite of the fact that constitutional governance institutions are established, but they are unable to actually regenerate the social order or collective action in these communities. Can we go to the next? So that is when, around 20 years ago, this landmark legislation was passed by Indian Parliament, and it pronounces the step as a step to correct historical injustice in widespread multiple displacements that these people suffered for the various schemes which impacted their security of tenure and livelihoods. And it extends the rights of decision-making and governance on forests. With conditions, of course, there is a cutoff date to prove that you have been a dweller close by to the forest or inside the forest, and you can't really have discriminatory mechanisms inside that the grassroots level governance institution that we call as Gram Sabha. And of course, it has to abide by the biodiversity laws and Wildlife Protection Act. And it provides secure right to be in a landscape where they have been, to cultivate what they want, and collectively also gather and sell forest produces and manage the forests in the way their livelihoods, food, and culture can be met. The implementation started in 2008 in various provinces, but it still actually cannot say that it has inculcated the idea that we are promoting in this presentation, as it is not a welfare policy. It is actually a right from the indigenous perspective to have the food, the house, and the agriculture that they want. And the institutions need to be rejuvenated, and eroding ecological knowledge has to be reinforced and even preserved. And it actually offers a sustainable and sovereign security of nutrition and livelihood security. But implementation needs to be actually put in that rights for framework to make it actually a very important thing to prioritize in implementation. In that context, if we look at what is the theory of change through FRA in the next slide, if wherever community forest rights are implemented well, this is what we find as a reconfiguration of their rights using this Rights Act. So the problems that we saw in the previous slides, as you know, ecological insecurity to human life, to landslides or floods, or to animal attacks, insecure tenurial rights, multiple displacements, insecure livelihoods, no regular earning and food, depleting resource base for livelihoods, it is an ecological insecurity, eroding institutions, it's a social, cultural and governance rights to have them reinforced, and also increasing violence and inequality among them. So the activities under this act actually are much more than the regular implementation requirements of writing an application, getting it vested, etc. It involves setting in place very regular and 100% represented Gram Sabha, the grassroots level village meetings, the discussions on the act by the people in the village council. Village council is 100% adults in the village, and the deliberations on the potential of this act to bring security of tenure and livelihoods, and documentation. So far, their knowledge systems have been very oral and vocal, and there has been a need to vest these rights, to document them, so to facilitate that process. And in the short term, you find that these villages then secure the title for community forest resource rights, and then they also have a management committee for these rights. They have very new livelihood initiatives by these committees, and there is a monitoring process also that can be put in place. And the long-term outcomes is the proof for theory of change that can be put in place by this landmark act. Almost the rights that we are talking about of sovereignty with respect to livelihoods. Yes, so in that case, I can conclude the presentation in the next slide by indicating the right actually, what kind of a house do I live in? As an indigenous tribe, actually, they're varied. I mean, they're diverse. We have numerous tribes. They all have their own, architecture and the way to secure water and do agriculture. So do we actually mean to complement or reinforce these with the modern ideas of development as per Human Development Index? Can we also have the livelihoods generated from the resources, but in spite or without the middleman and the larger neoliberal economy taking most of the benefits? That is the idea from where the Forest Rights Act promise communities the livelihood integrity and ecological security. I stop here. And I apologize for the fact that I need to leave a bit early because I have to catch a long distance flight, and the airport itself is a long distance drive. But thank you very much. I'll be around for a couple of more presentations.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Seema. Wishing you a good trip. For those attending, please feel free to write your comments or questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. I would like to introduce our second speaker today, Dr. Maria Eugenia Flores. She's a PhD in anthropological sciences from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's an assistant professor in the anthropology program of the University of Salta and an associate researcher at the Argentinian National Scientific Council. She participates in Green Climate Funds programs for forest management with indigenous communities and in Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO projects in socio-ecological practices, indigenous epistemologies, territories, cultural change, and indigenous and mestizo shamanism. She conducts research on the vitality of indigenous languages in the Chaco region, co-producing educational materials, community stories, and other resources for epistemic justice. The floor is with you, Maria Eugenia.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And I want to thank all, especially to Gretel and Rachel. Okay, my presentation is titled Beyond the Abstract Subject, toward a political ontology of human rights in the climate crisis. The next slide, please. Okay. Remark addressed the central question in this webinar: are human rights being transformed in the context of the climate crisis? We think the transformation occurs only if we are willing to abandon a premise that modern law has taken for granted, that the only legitimate subject of right is the individual, rational, property-owning, and abstract human being. The climate crisis is not merely an ecological crisis. It is a crisis of relationship. Next, please. Based on my fieldwork with indigenous people and traditional community in the southern cone of Latin America, especially in the Chaco, in the Andes, and the Argentine Patagonia, I argue that human rights in their hegemonic formulation prove insufficient, even inadequate, to respond to the way of life these communities practice daily. Not because human rights are a minor instrument, but because they were conceived within an ontology that radically separates the human from the not human, the culture from the nature, the subject from the object. Next. Indigenous communities understand that the world is relational, and their own words are not metaphorical. They are practical, ritualistic, and embedded in everyday life. The plant is not a plant genetic research. It is a grandmother who teaches health and warmth. Also the river. The river is not drinking water. It is a living path that has memory, that can become angry, that must be greeted before crossing. The forest is not a native woodland. It is a territorial body that breeds, communicates, and imposes conditions. These communities do not inhabit a world of separation between nature and culture. They inhabit a continuum, a relational world where plants have agency, animals have intentionality, places have memory, and humans, from being about all else, are just one node within a network of interdependencies. This is not folklore. It is a practical ontology that organizes domestic economies, rituals, knowledge systems, and protocols for coexistence. When an indigenous woman from the Chaco reaches the forest before entering to gather fruit, she is not performing a symbolic act. She is enacting, putting in action, a relationship of reciprocity with the being she is recognized as another, as a valid interlocutor. Next. In response to this epistemic challenge, some countries in the so-called Global South Cone have begun to test institutional answers, like Bolivia and Ecuador. Inspired by the indigenous movement and by the philosophies of Suma Tausay, Suma Camaya, or Teco Becabi, living well, have incorporated into their constitutional text the recognition of right of nature for Pachamama, Mother Earth, and for certain ecosystems and non-human beings. These cases constitute a legal political milestone of enormous importance. Next. For the first time, a modern Spain legal system, paired to the Western legal tradition, acknowledged that nature is not a thing, but a subject with its own rights. This gives rise to an epistemic plurality, where different ways of knowing and being in the world begin to permeate legal frameworks. Human rights, traditionally anchored in an individualistic and anthropocentric epistemology, are forced into a dialogue with other traditions that place relationality, reciprocity, and care at the center. Now, If we accept that not humans have the capacity for action, then we must also accept that they are political subjects. And if they are political subjects, then their protection in the context of climate crisis is not a matter of human charity. It is a demand for justice. And this demands profound reflection with the legal sphere. This brings me to a proposal based on my research. I offer the following wide, like a systemic and political tool for researchers, public officials, legal practitioners, and indigenous organizations. These are 8 points. 1. Move away from a modern interpretation based on the dichotomy between the natural and the cultural. This dichotomy is not universal. It is a historically and geographically situated construct that can no longer function as the sole framework for understanding. 2. Recognize that territories play a fundamental role in the production and reproduction of indigenous social life. They are not support of culture. They are the very condition of its possibility. 3. Highlight the continuity of relationships between humans and non-humans in a relational world. It is not a matter of adding non-human to the human-centered analysis. It is a matter of starting from relationality as a primary gift. 4. Start from the heterodoxy of social worlds and territories. There is no single indigenous way of inhabiting the world. There are communal pluralities, each with its own logics, tensions, and forms of creativity. 5. Conceive of territory as an intergenerational educational space. Knowledge is not transmitted only in school or workshops. It is transmitted through walking, harvesting, praying, and caring. The territory is the great teacher. 6. Consider the territory as a source of concrete, organized knowledge emerging from a theoretical memory. This is not abstract or disembodied knowledge. It is knowledge, learning, practice, and it is includes a fundamental ethical dimension, how to relate well to other beings. 7. Pay attention to the community's inaction in relation to the territory. This inaction takes place in conjunction with bioethnic memory, that memory which brings the environmental and cultural diversity of territories and into a dialogue. 8. Build the social group memory by attending to its relationship with the forest and the beings that inhabit it. The history of indigenous communities cannot be written without including the history of its relationships with the non-humans that co-inhabit its territory. So, to think about the rights of non-humans from this perspective is not a theoretical luxury. It is an epistemic and political necessity for any project that aspires to a real transformation of human rights in the context of the climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Eugenia. For those attending, please feel free to write your comments or question in the chat. I would like now to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Ampor Mardent. She's an assistant professor and lecturer in sociology and anthropology at Thammasat University, Bangkok. She represents Thailand in the Asian Women for Peace Registry, contributing expertise on gender and peace building. She is also an investigator at the Arts Center of Excellence for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Her research focuses on cultural politics in Southeast Asia and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. She founded and directed the Center of Excellence on Women and Social Security at Wailalak University, holding a PhD in anthropology from Goethe University, Frankfurt. Her work bridged ethnography, gender, religion, and peace meditation. The title of her presentation is Everyday Rights Making from Below, Intersectionality, Life, and Women's Struggles in Thailand. Please, Ampon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raquel, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening from the place that you are in. Thanks again for allowing me to join the webinar on the recomposition of human rights in the Anthropocene Global South perspective. So I'd like to share the case of Thailand and discuss how women's everyday struggle invite us to rethink about human rights from below. So my key argument is very simple. In the Anthropocene, human rights cannot be understood only through the legal institutions or the state policy or from the formal rights framework. Instead, to my studies, human rights must also be understood through people's everyday struggles for the land, the livelihood, dignity, and ecological survival. So this perspective is particularly important in the Global South, where environmental degradation, the land disposition, which my talk today is more or less deal with this case, I mean the land disposition, and with the question of security and justice. So when Raquel introduced me that I work in the area of women, peace, and security agenda, this is more traditionally focused on armed conflict and women participation in peace process. And women also experience insecurity through the lens of invisible forms of structural violence, including environmental degradation, loss of the lands, and also threats to livelihood. One of the most important examples to the community of forests in Thailand, as Anna also requested to share the ideas of community forest orป่าชุมชน in Thailand, which is the area that collectively managed by the local communities through the local rules, ecological knowledge, and shared responsibilities. So they provide food, water, medical plants, including the livelihood resource, while people also support diversity in conservation. So the local community actually have managed forests for more than 4 generations. In Thailand, the modern community forest movement emerged in 1980s. It took almost 3 decades of struggle before the Community Forest Act finally passed in 2019. So for the contributions of the community forest, actually women frequently remain underrepresented in the formal decision making, and also with the community forest as the community forest committee. So this tension between everyday responsibility and limited political recognition raises important questions about the rights, representation, and also justice. The case I'd like to share with all of you today is the area in the northeast of Thailand, Chayapum, where the green star is there. This is the province in the northeast. Actually, in the studies, I try to focus on the different areas, like the case of contemporary development project in the Upper South as well, particularly the proposed land bridge project linking the Gulf in Thailand and the Andaman Sea in the south. But to focus more on the land ownership today, I just like to focus on the place in Chayapum where the green star is there. So I visit the community and learn a lot from women in that area. The project on peace and security is there as well, when I like to look at women involved in political participation. Although Thailand is also often discussed in relation to economic development and environmental conservation, many rural communities also continue to experience the tension between the state conservation policy and local livelihood, as I mentioned earlier, about different projects of the government. The field work that I focus, probably you can switch to the next slide. There are a few of the pictures. This is the community in Sapwai, Chayapum province, those women, not all of them that on the pictures, I mean on the screen that I discussed with, but many of them are there still in the community. Women inherit the land, and this is from their parents, and also they have cultivated mainly in that area is cassava and other crops for many decades. But the state expand the conservation measure and also enforce forest regulations. They suddenly found themselves categorized as illegal occupants on land they considered their ancestral home. So some were arrested, and others were forced and faced with the court cases, legal uncertainty. But the case is already closed. And by now it's already closed, and they are also released from the prison. During the conversation, what struck me most was that women did not describe their struggle primarily in legal terms. They spoke about survival. They find a way to feed their children. They also spoke about how to protect the family land and dignity. For them, the land was not merely the property. The land represents memory, kinship, identity, livelihood, and also belonging. And this brings us to another important question regarding the topic that we care about today is what happens when the environmental protection is implemented when it is implemented without recognizing the history and the rise of the community. In many international discussions, environmental governance is also present as a positive and necessary response to ecological crisis. But from the perspective of many women that I talk with them, I learn from them, is the conservation policy can also become a source of exclusion and insecuritize them when the local people are denied access to the land and the resource on which they live depend. This is where the community forests become important. Community forests are also the area that people attempt to manage and collectively by the locals. And they are also simply environmental project. They have the space where the community protect the biodiversity while sustaining livelihood and cultural traditions. Women in the community that I discuss and talk with, they play a central role in the process. They collect the food and medical plant, and they also care for water resource and etc. They organize the collective activity and support community well-being. In other words, women are not only the victims of environmental change, they're also environmental stewardship. So their work demonstrates that they care for the people. The experience of women in Chayapum, in the area that I work lately, many of the places, therefore, they face with the challenging. The human rights discussion focus on the civil and political rights alone, but for people in this area and the people in the global south, as we are discussed today is we have the question. I also raised the question, and this is the urgent question concerning the access to the land and the food security, as professors mentioned since the beginning of our forum. What is the ability to maintain meaningful lives? And for the case in Chayapum, it reminds us that the rights are not only granted by the state, but the rights are also enacted through everyday practice, through cultivating the land, caring for the families, through protecting the forests, resisting displacement, and sustaining community. So to conclude and what I learned from the voice of women in Chayapum in the northeast of Thailand, they invite me and also for today invite us to rethink about human rights from below. So the experience demonstrates that the environmental justice, gender justice, and human rights cannot be separated. In Anthropocene, protecting human dignity requires protecting the ecological conditions that make life possible. So to listen to women's everyday struggle helps us to imagine more inclusive and community-centered approach to understand justice, security, and sustainability. The voice reminds us that the future of human rights depend on not only the institution, the laws, but also the people who continue to defend their life, their land, and the dignity in everyday life. So I just would like to end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Antoine Kapunka. I would like to introduce you our fourth speaker today, Dr. Lucrecia Greco. She is a University of Buenos Aires and Argentinian Social Sciences Research Council, specializing in the body, movement, sound, and traditional and ancestral knowledge of the body and territories. She's also a performer, anthropologist, and massage therapist. She has dedicated herself to exploring from diverse perspectives the intersection between embodiment, territory, performance, animism, social environmentalism, and politics. She investigates care among human and between species in traditional Quilombola and indigenous communities in Brazil and Argentina. In her artistic and academic work, she weaves together the relationship between care, people, and territories, anti-racism, and counter-colonial knowledge. The title of her presentation is Trading the Land, Quilombola Learnings, Body and Ancestrality in Struggles for Rights. Please, Lucrecia, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you very much. I am very grateful with Raquel and Gretel for having created this space, and I'm very proud of being with you. And I want to congratulate all of you because of the engagement with your work. Okay, I put another title today, and I'm presenting the image of the author of one of the sentences of my speak. Step on the ground, read the word is a phrase of Anacleta Pires that it's we talk about reference person, not leader, because reference person brings this idea of being in community. So our reference person, that it's not, nowadays she's not more in this word, Anacleta Pires, gives this phrase for us. Step on the ground, read the word. Time, body, territory, and more than human rights in Santa Rosa dos Pretos, Maranhão, Northeast Brazil. I have put a little example because I would like to talk about all the item that join us, but from this little space of the word, because I think and they think it is a net that is interconnected, and now I will begin to read, and I will be more clear in English, sorry. So you can pass to the next, only to give a notion of space. This is Brazil and the state of, and we have, where in Brazil we have traditional communities called as quilombos, yes? I will talk a little bit about it later. I will start to read because of my English. So I will think this idea of Anacleta Pires that brings the body and the territory, step on the ground, read the word, pisa chão, lê mundo in Portuguese, leave us to speak about Anthropocene, and we are talking here about one idea, one way of naming the Anthropocene that we have with Gretel and other people, named colonial Zen. Colonial Zen critique lies in the engagement with relational epistemologies. So it's a critique of Anthropocene, is a critique of anthropocentrism that lies in the idea of Anthropocene. But we stayed with the problem of Anthropocene, but we are talking about this to put our eyes in this idea of relationship. And we want to expose with this idea how colonial work that naturalize the difference and the separation between humanity and nature brings this colonial critics is the same as the communities are doing Anacleta are telling us, you only will know and understand what is happening if you step on the world and if you step on the ground. That's the way you will manage to read the world. And she and all the Quilombola people and all the people that are affected in sacrifice areas that we are going to talk about invite us to step on the ground, because this is a way of knowing what is happening. And they identify that the things that happens in that little piece of land affects all the world. So this kind of knowledge that is based in body has a lot to give to us. So that's why step on the ground and read the world. So communities are the first to be affected, and the ones that knows that destruction consequences are shared by the whole world. But also because of the relational experience and the relational knowledge, simple as this idea of step on the ground, read the world, they can inform us about that. Even in Brazil, in which there are political actions and affirmative politics towards traditional communities, the enterprises that lead into extractivism and destruction have power, have a lot of power and nefast consequences, necropolitic consequences in life of communities. So even in the case of Marañón, but not only, we are looking the map of Quilombola, of lands that are traditional communities, Black traditional communities called Quilombos. Even if there are protections, the same actors that damage the communities are more of the times the ones that give financial aid. So the politics is very schizophrenic. So we put the enterprises that damages the territories are the ones that that in the institutional politics, in the times of institutional politics, are giving, for example, a protection area, or give cultural aid for give economical aid for cultural manifestations. So coming back to the territory, Marañón, when in state in which is the Quilombola territory, is the third state with Black population in the Northeast. Anacleta Pires, the creator of this phrase that I present to you, lived in Santa Rosa, that it was a Quilombola community in Marañón, in which even their leadership as Anacleta grew even with love that initially protected their existence and with a century-old resistance to land usurpation, because they remain as a little autonomy in till the end. Sorry, my English is so bad, and I am allergic to read, and when I love to read, I enter in confusion. But the predatory advance of development projects began to strain the lives of peoples and communities in Marañón in the 1950s. Highway, ports, steel mills, and rational livestock farming were planned over traditional territories, and capital was attracted for investment in places that classified as territorial and social voids were destined for exploitation. Government programs, new lands, colonization project, and later a project called Grande Carayás program aimed to exploit the iron deposits in Pará, another state that is at the left in the map, and build structures to transport along Marañón coast, as well as a series of interconnected actions, produce an intense and rapid alteration of the lifestyle of local population, traditional populations that live stepping on the ground and live knowing the relationship between life of present, life of past, nature, culture, this this relationally ontology that we are talking about, that all the girls here have talked about, all the professionals here. So I will talk you about the consequences of these projects, the attack on territories by the arrival of projects or the threat or of their arrival produces a disorganization of life that involves the imbalance of established relationships between humans and not human, which led to illness. In the Santa Rosa Pretos territory in which Anacleta lived, the relationships of care and respect that nourish life has been constantly broken with the advance of the works, because a river has dried, for example, or a lot of big projects affected and damaged the land. In addition to and along with the generation of fissures in human collectives have created antagonisms in favor of promises of development and ending the life of the territory. Illness affects various dimensions of life and in the affected territories. But how people, if we can pass to the other photograph and I will finish. We can pass to the, yes. How the resistance of the territory is the connection with ancestors. Parties remain being, the communities invite us to go to the territory and to be in the celebration and the ritual with them, and to know which kind of life that is life of the present, of the past, human and not human, have to be protected. I have 1 more minute because I lost myself in the, yes, okay.
Yes.
Because I lost the image and I feel very nervous, sorry. So, Quilombo, that is its traditional community, is a place that receives a lot of people, and this is one of the ways of resisting. It is a meeting place, and in the alliances, the defense is organized. But to the work of walls and papers that constrains and oppresses with laws and with development projects, Anacleta, for example, circulated mainly in the pursuit of Quilombola territorial rights and against projects of death. In a safe reading, she opposes the possibility of forging spaces of life. It is necessary, she said, to get up from our chairs and go to the territories to feel more. She cheats the importance of stepping on the ground. She talks about the need for human respect, what they do with in the celebrations and in the meetings, in the alliances. This land that was affected, we have to imagine that till 1950s they lived in relative autonomy with nature, agriculture, extractivism, wood extractivism, and from the 1950s to the day of present, we have buses, trains, electric post. We have a lot of problems of environmental problems in the community, and this is not the only place in which it happens. So over the past few years, based on a history of working with community leaders, or we call reference person, from territories under attack by the agro-export model and prompted by suggestions of these affected people, the study group in the University of Federal of Marañón, with other alliances, they organized a university extension project centered on a training course in citizenship, human rights, and environmental education, primarily targeting young people from communities located in this area and these affected areas. That it's called School of People Educations in the Carachas Corridor. Considering the attacks and the shared experience of illnesses affecting both body and territory that we have described, during political training in these meetings, there is an increasing effort to create micro-political spaces for care and knowledge sharing, which usually involve dynamics, mysticism, play, movements of music and dance that are bring from the communities and from other reference of other persons of reference. But the purpose of this space is also to share in the same space, all stepping on the ground, that the suffering that you have there, I have here. So they join and they meet in these groups from different territories, and this is a way of action. So they put this example of being together, being in the territories, because the formations are in the lands, and we know we can listen to the other and know that we are not alone and join for political action. So that's my presentation. Only to finish, I sorry, those photographs are images of the celebration. I tried not to put the faces of the persons, but this is the idea, to pass from this key idea of Anacleta Pires to this political formation that it's all communities together. So sorry for my English improvement.
Was perfect. Thank you, Lucrecia. Thank you very much for your presentation. For those who attending, please feel free to write your comments or questions in the chat. I would like to introduce our fifth speaker today, Dr. Paula Balduino. She is a professor and researcher in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Brasília. Has a bachelor degree in social sciences from the University of Brasília, a master's degree and doctorate in social anthropology from the University of Brasília, with a sandwich program at the National University of Colombia. Has experience in anthropology of ethnic and racial relations, Afro-Brazilian populations, and gender environmental anthropology and Afro-Latin American studies. Works with quilombolas, Afro-descended peasant communities in Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador. Was director of policies for Quilombola and Romani peoples at the Ministry of Racial Equality. She's a member of the Brazilian Anthropology Association. Her book, Matronas Afro-Pacíficas, Tramas da Resistência na Fronteira Colômbia-Equador, published by Editora UNB, was a finalist for the 2025 Jabuti Academic Prize. The title of her presentation is Matricentric Ethos, Afro-Descendants Communities Connecting Human and Environmental Rights. Please, Paula, I now invite you to take the floor.
Thank you. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you, Raquel, for the introduction. So this presentation will try to connect the concept of IA with multilateralism institutional settings that represents recent goals of Afro-descendant communities. The discussion seeks to bring visibility to more than human subjects and apprehends a contemporary movement made by Afro-descendant communities connecting human rights to environmental rights, which in some way widens the conception of human rights. As we know by Oyeumi's work, IA is a social, spiritual institution that transcends procreation by the body of an anatomical female and resonates in a collective experience and an ethos of social management that provides direction and basis for political action and necessary social transformation. IA is in the core of the seniority-based system. The spiritual and material power that comes from IA is called by Oyeumi as matripotency. As we all were born of an IA, in this system, IA is the more senior human being. As an archetypal human being, the IA represents humanity. Can you pass, please, Raquel? Spiritual and material power derives from the unique role of the IA in making, nurturing, and preserving humanity. Here, we would like to think of matripotency as a creative force of humanity, but also of the world. This allows us to move from humanity creation to creation among more than human subjects, in our case, plants. This is also a path for moving away from a Western-centric logic that opposes nature and culture. We are suggesting that in African cosmologies and in Afro-diasporic cosmologies too, as we will see, bodies and landscapes are mutually constituted from a matricentric perspective. As Ingo states, people derive from their living engagement with the world. The landscape becomes part of us and we part of it. Ingo questions the division between inside and outside. He challenges the perspective that nature is what is out there while we're living here. Body and landscape are complementary terms. Each implies the other. The process of building and sustaining body landscapes is what the author calls embodiment. Both body and landscape do not pre-exist, but are constituted together. In this sense, the landscape is never complete. It is a movement always in construction. Here, we propose to think about the body landscape co-constitution as a matricentric construction. And to do this, we now connect ourselves with the universe of Terreiro peoples in Brazil. Religious and cosmological traditions structured from African territorial origins that were recreated here in Brazil. Among the best-known Candomblé nations are Angola, Jeje, Efon, and Queto. These origins include the Yorubas from Nigeria, the Bantus from Angola and Congo, and the Efons from the former Dahomey, now known as Benin and Togo. Terreiro people in Brazil express an ancestral and symbolic link to a specific African territory and tradition. In Brazilian Terreiro peoples of Queto Nation, Iá is a title given to some leaves. Can you pass, please? Thank you. Eueiá is the name of this leaf in the Queto tradition of Candomblé, constituted from Yoruba land. Its name in the Angola Candomblé tradition is Capeba. In Linneus' botanical classification, it is called Pipe regineri. If we would translate the Yoruba name, Eueiá, it would be the mother of leaves or the mother leaf. In any case, this leaf is Iá. If we think of Eueiá as the mother of leaves, we are referring to the seniority-based system, a principle of Yoruba social organization that also structures relationships in African-rooted territories in Brazil. In these territories, other trees are also Iás, like the jackfruit tree, Iau-Paucá, or the oil palm, Iau-Agiope. What they have in common is that they are the oldest. Probably they came from Africa in the diaspora. If we think of it as a mother leaf, it would be a womb leaf. In ritualistic process in Candomblé, the relationship between people and plants involves baths made from leaves, especially to some person in specific moments. Eueiá is a womb leaf because it is capable of directing a person's path into important steps in developing spirituality and therefore developing humanity. As Iá, this leaf actuate in making, nurturing, and preserving humanity. It is worth noting that there is no Ewe Baba that could be translated by father leaf or father of leaves. Thus, embodiment, this co-constitution of body landscape, is being guided by a matricentric principle. So until now, we have thought about Iás, pursuing relationships among human beings, among plants, and between both of them. We saw that the matricentric ethos guided the process of making, nurturing, and preserving humanity and more than human subjects in some places of Africa and African diaspora. To finish, we propose a reflection about the implication of two-speed multilateralism for rights, recognitions, participation, and policy translation. In the last 4 years, Afro-descendant communities have been recognized as relevant stakeholders for environmental rights, especially in the conservation of biodiversity and adaptation for climate change. It is important to note that Afro-descendant communities first appeared in UN negotiations in Durban World Conference Against Racism in 2001. By examining the Declaration and the Durban Program of Action, we see that within the scope of foreign policy, the issue of Afro-descendants was initially anchored in human rights. The whole of people of African descent in global decision-making on environment and climate had not been considered at that time. This framework began to change in 2023 with Brazil's proposal of Sustainable Development Goal 18, Ethnic Racial Equality, within the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. SDG 18 recognizes that the practice and knowledge of indigenous people and people of African descent are relevant for protecting, conserving, and caring for the environment. In 2024, CBD COP16 was a milestone for the Afro-descendant agenda in environmental multilateralism. COP16 recognized the central role of people of African descent in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and created the subsidiary board of Article 8G. Regarding financing, COP16 determined the creation of the Cali Fund, establishing that at least half of the resources should be allocated to indigenous people and local communities. In 2025, last year, UNF COP30 continued these advances. The Just Transition Work Program recognized that effective and inclusive just transition pathways must include broad and meaningful participation of people of African descent. The new Gender Work Program Action Plan enhances the participation and leadership of Afro-descendant women in decision-making process related to climate change and reinforces the safety, protection, and support for Afro-descendant women, environmental and human rights defenders. The Gender Action Plan also emphasizes racial discrimination as a factor that increases women's vulnerability in the context of climate change. And the Global Adaptation Goals indicators incorporated a racial and a gender perspective. What do we see here? It seems to be that Afro-descendant communities are merging two platforms that usually appear disconnected in UN negotiations, human and environmental rights. Anthropology has a work to do in this scenario, I think so, to investigate how human rights are being transformed by this merging movement, to investigate the relationships between Afro-descendant communities and environment, to understand the ways territorial and community-based practices can interact with recent decisions of CBD, UNFCCC, and the SDG 18, and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula, for your presentation. For those attending, please feel free to write your comments or questions in our shared chat. I would like to introduce our sixth and last speaker today, Dr. Jasmine Imonen. She's a social anthropologist whose work has explored schooling in Peru, the potential to decolonize sustainable development, and the use of artistic practices to confront climate and ecological crises. She works in schools, and her passion lies in learning what goes beyond literacy as a means to transform educational systems. The title of her presentation is Can Everyone's Rights, Jokaisen Oikeus, in Finland be extended to more than humans? Please, Jasmine, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. First, I would like to just point out that I agree what was said by Thomas at the beginning of the session about the South existing in North and how it exists here. Then I do my own addition that fits this paper. So in this presentation, I will ask whether everyone's right, local concept used in Finland, can be extended to more than humans. I begin with this romanticized picture inspired by the Finnish Karelian national epic, the Kalevala. I have the book here. The Kalevala is a collection of poems that were transmitted orally for centuries before modern times. The poems depict a world roughly from Iron Age, from 6th to 12th century, a world that was inhabited by the ancient peoples who lived in what is today considered Finland and Karelia. A part of Karelia belonged to Russia now. The poems represent a time prior to the arrival of Christianity, when people lived in a world populated by forest and weather deities, and animals, plants, and objects acted, spoke, and were often treated as equals to humans. The poem here on the slide describes an exchange involving Väinämöinen, who is the central figure of the Finnish national epic. Väinämöinen is an old sage or wizard with the power of song. As we can see in this picture, he's playing a traditional instrument called the kantele. In the epic, his singing has magical powers, so he's kind of like a shamanic figure, and he's able to, for example, to sing a man to the swamp. The other figure in this poem is Kokko, who is a giant eagle capable of creating fire. So Kokko is also the name the name of the bonfire that is still lit during the summer solstice in Finland. In the poem, Kokko speaks to Väinämöinen, who is stranded at sea, and offers to carry him away. He does this because he feels grateful to Väinämöinen. Väinämöinen had left a tree for the birds to sit on when he was clearing the forest. Thus, while Väinämöinen retains the upper hand as he has been cutting down the forest for his own use, he still thinks of Kokko by leaving a tree for him to sit in. Kokko is grateful for this and saves him from the sea. The moral lesson of the poem is that you should be mindful of other beings when you clear the forest, as the forest is not meant for you alone. And now we can switch the slide, please. So in today's Nordic countries, modern colonial capitalism has wiped out reciprocal relationships and reverence for the more than human present in the poetry of Kalevala. Nonetheless, the boundary between nature and culture can sometimes become blurry because of how space is organized, and everyday practices undermine this division. The concept of jokaisen oikeus, everyone's right, is recognized across Finland, Norway, and Sweden. It refers to everyone's right to enter forests, gather berries or mushrooms, and so on, provided that no harm is caused. It doesn't matter whether the forest is public or private. And the roots of jokaisen oikeus lie in history. In ancient Finland, when people began clearing forests for settlement and cultivation, they cleared who cleared it. If and when the land plot was abandoned and reforested, it could be reclaimed by another person by clearing it. This was changed in the 18th century land reform that shifted agriculture from traditional communal arrangements to private ownership in the name of farming efficiency. However, the custom remained to regard the forest as common property. This is why even today, forests in the Nordic countries are often seen as kind of a green commons where everyone can go and dwell. I would, however, like to challenge this narrative a little because it is often presented to other countries in an idealized form. Jokaisen oikeus, everyone's right, is human-centered concept. For instance, the blurred division between nature and culture allows hunting as a leisure activity, and about 5% of Finns participate in hunting. In January 2026, this year, wolves that were previously protected were classified as a hunted species. The wolves were described as entering yards and attacking pets and livestock. And the new law permits up to 100 wolves to be hunted each year. We can go to next slide. Baipai and Kotari have suggested that the global south is a region made subaltern by capitalist modernity, and therefore multiple souths also exist within the global north and vice versa. I'd suggest that a south exists also in the north where animals dwell and are dispossessed from their territories by hunting, or where they are reared for production to maintain capitalism going. Legally, animals in Finland are still largely considered property comparable to objects. While the protection and treatment of animals are regulated by law in the Animal Welfare Act, we should ask whether raising animals merely for production and consumption by humans causes in itself pain and suffering and goes against their welfare. Official slaughter and production statistics confirm that for every single human living in Finland, there are over 14 animals killed annually for consumption and material production. And then we can go the next slide, please. As the previous presentations today have shown, the concept of rights is itself human-centered and individualistic, and we do better to place relationality and reciprocity at the center. This also means recognizing that the separation from and mastery over nature that is implicated in the concept of rights for nature is illusory. The problem with rights is that they can be manipulated for the advantage of capitalism. Western legal political orders have always granted extensive rights to private individuals and their organizations, neglecting to pair those privileges with corresponding responsibilities. So when working towards more than human rights, there is also a pressing need to fight against the overly broad rights granted to private individuals and organizations, such as those operating in the meat industry. We could learn from the Kalevala on how responsibility and reverence was maintained with the more than human, but also from communities that live today in relational worlds. And that's where I end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for your presentation. And thank you so much to all our speakers for this rich and thought-provoking discussion. Also, I would like to thank to our audience for your comments and reactions. We now move into the final part of our webinar, a moderated discussion with questions and comments from the audience. We will read the written comments and then open the floor for an oral participation, and then invite our speakers to answer or comment. And then we will do this in 2 to 3 rounds, depending on the time available that we have. So,
yes, Gretel. Until now, we have 2 comments, not necessarily questions, but I will read to you. So Saptashi Bairaji wrote, it's wonderful the way Lucrecia talked about embodiment, border, nature, and human rights. And Annapurna Pandey wrote, "Thank you so much. The presentation on Brazil explains the politics of care of the protesters, especially women, vis-a-vis schizophrenic politics of the corporation." If any one of you wants to comment something about that. So let's keep these comments in mind. And I asked, are there any oral question or comments from our audience?
I think Annapurna wants to ask a question.
Please go on, Annapurna.
Thank you so much. It's Annapurna Pandey, and here I have also Professor Triloki Pandey. So we have a couple of maybe a comment and question, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. I'm putting ourselves on the video so that you can see. I will give the forum first to Professor Pandey, and then I will also ask a question, comment. But first of all, I want to congratulate the presenters and the organizers for this amazing webinar, because it is time to, I would say that it is not just the time, it is high time that we talk about the politics, and especially that kind of, the nature culture divide, and not just the more than human, but the kind of, I would say, human non-human interaction, partnership, agency, subjectivity. So it is so important to hear what's happening on the ground in different parts of the world. So I want to congratulate the presenters and the organizers here, and just let me pass it on to Triloki Pandey.
So I don't want to repeat what Annapurna said, but I learned a great deal from listening to all the papers. I began my life studying the tribal people in India, and then moved to North America, where I worked with Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo in the American Southwest. So what I learned from studying these indigenous people was the Western framework, pre-modern, modern, post-modern, to a large extent, are the dichotomy or the binary between nature and culture, was basically a feature of being modern. There's no non-modern society where there is a binary between tradition and modern. Similarly, there is hardly any indigenous community anywhere in the world where there is a dichotomy that human beings are separate from nature. Human beings were not separate from nature. This separation, to a large extent, really began when human beings were no longer dependent on nature for their survival. And as a result, they started to put themselves superior to the people who are still earning their living from land and forest and other sources. So I remember a very wise Hopi friend telling me that our identity is tied to our land. So long as we are growing corn, we are Hopi. The moment we stop doing that, we will cease to be Hopi. So what he was really saying, that there was no separation between us human beings and what is out there in nature. So this dependence, land was critical, because my friends taught me that land was sacred to them, land was like church to them, and sanctity of land to a large extent was basically because the food they were eating was also used by the same term. Toya means sacred, toya also means maize, the food on which they were dependent. So what I'm really saying, that in the postmodern phase, when we have become too much dependent on all these machines, we are really becoming totally unaware that this world was prepared by our non-human relatives so that we can do what we were really planning to do. Without their collaboration, without their help, we would not have been able to do what we were able to achieve. So that sense of relational way of looking at things, that we are related to them, nature is our kin, became alien to the Western people. And as a result, to a large extent, you can see the degradation of nature, the degradation of the environment. We were not really totally aware of it. Still, we are not acknowledging in certain parts of the world that in the period of Anthropocene, we human beings are responsible for what has happened to the land, to the water, to our sources of life. And unless and until we take the responsibility, things are not going to change. And we owe a great deed to the women who are really teaching us about these things. Thank you very much.
Sorry that it was not a question but comment, but it's an essence of appreciation, as you all can see for the presentations. I wanted to ask, I work among in the tribal region in India, especially in a region where there is active protest going on. Women are on the forefront. It's called the Sijimali movement. After many of us, maybe that the scholars from India would be aware, and this is happening in Odisha, in the eastern region of India. This is the bauxite mining. This is the kind of the range of bauxite mining, and we all are may be very familiar with the very famous movement called Niyamagiri movement, where women were protesting, women were leading the protest, and ultimately they won their right to hold on to their mountain. This was in 2013, but unfortunately that the corporations and the state, they have made a wonderful nexus to continue the mining in and around the area. And now the Sijimali mining is very active. Women are on the forefront. They are getting arrested. There's kind of a lot of atrocity going on. So my question here is, when we say land is the kind of, the memory, the kinship, and not only just livelihood, and land is the agency. So I'm kind of intrigued that when we are separating this women vis-a-vis men. So I was wondering that how do we think of that kind of, this maybe the androgynous way of connecting with the land, and why we say that kind of, that, what could be the explanation of women being on the forefront. That's kind of, maybe I'm trying to kind of articulate. So I would like to hear from different kind of research, field research happening in different parts of the world, as our presenters presented so eloquently. So what is the explanation? And also at the same time, ultimately, because how do, as you kind of the role of anthropology, in what way we really can bring a different way of looking, so that it will be impacting the policy making. Thank you.
Thank you, Annapurna. Thank you so much to both of you for your contributions. Now we are opening the floor for our speakers' reaction, please. Who would like to comment? Maria Eugenia, Lucre, Paula,
Probably, yes, I could start from the study that I shared today is a case of land preservation. I also link with the community forest, which basically the community reserve it and manage it for long. And then the technology of the globalization, which means that the law and etc. Requires people to follow the act. So by this, in the case of northeastern of Thailand, women were charged when they, in prison, when they challenging that kind of technology in the names of the law. So which means that they were illegalized to own the land according to the new announcement from, new technology or new regulations that are delivered by the government. So by that situation, the women also attempt to unite it together and ask possibility from the local officer to support them. But unluckily, the local officer also have to align with the national requirements. Women then ask the support from the Union of Lawyers to go to the court and negotiate in different ways. But at the same time, they also promote, asking the support from the community all over the country by saying through the media, and then the media also came to them, including the human rights defenders. By that situation, the news expanded in the sense of people were abused by the government, and then the media amplified the voices of women. The women negotiate in different other forms. They were united with different groups of women in other regions who faced with the same or similar situation regarding the land reformation. In the position of anthropologists who are involved in between or after the case deal. So in my case, in this land dispute, I involved after the case is already closed. So which means that they reflect from the memories and things more reconcile, but they want to share, they want to extend their narratives to different other generations. And they want many anthropologists, not only anthropologists, but people who are doing the research to document. And also they still continue to work not only in the issues of land preservation or land management, but also they want to promote the voice and the rights of women. Many of them became human rights defenders from the local level. So this is what we observe as the anthropologists. And when the men, there are not only cases of men, but also cases or participants who are men as well. So with the men, there are more followers in compared to women who are the leaders in this case. So this is what I could share or reflect from the position of anthropologists who conduct the research as ethnographer.
Thank you so much, Amporn. I'm going to read a comment in the chat from Kritishnu saying, Global South needs its own lens to see and explain events happening here. Thank you so much, Kritishnu, for your comment. And I would like to know if there are more comments or questions from our audience or our speakers. The floor is open.
Yeah, hey, Gretel. I would like to comment what they said, Pandey. Maybe to comment something Professor Pandey said, and then try to interact with also with Annapurna. Okay. I think it is very, very important to challenge this division between nature and culture. This was also what Maria Eugenia Flores tried to say, to do with her presentation, and that shows this division is not in all world. and it has a history, a moment in the history. So when we, in our communities, Terreiro peoples, when we have a bath, for example, the leaves, they interactuate with our body, making us human. And we also make these leaves another thing, because when we are in relation. So I think it is very important that we can visualize, visibilize, make visible these other relationships we have with environment, and this is a way of showing that the division nature culture is historically, it has his moment, her moment. It's not universal, is what I would like to say. And maybe between women, this is more visible. I think that maybe this is why women are in the front of movements defending environmental rights and human rights, because it's very common that women are in charge of this. I don't know if I could make myself comprehensive.
Thank you so much, Paula.
Absolutely.
Maxine,
Thank you.
please, is with you.
Hi, everyone. This webinar was so great as a aspiring environmental anthropologist. So thank you to all the speakers. I just have a few questions. They're not really directed to any specific speaker, but just as a way to start a conversation, because I've been thinking about certain things, and I think this is the right space to bring these questions. So my first question is, what constitutes as indigenous knowledge? Because in almost throughout the presentation, there was this common theme that we must return to, disregard Western systems because they're not benefiting indigenous people, right? So my question is, what then constitutes as indigenous knowledge? Is it stories that we hear from our grandparents? How can we create or recompose a system on indigenous knowledge? Like, where will it come from? I hope you guys understand my question. And then the second one is, as a result, right, of the colonial project, many economies in Africa depend on mineral extraction, right? And which does lead to environmental degradation. But there's this conundrum, right? There's this vacuum that even though I'll just say like in quotation marks, low-skilled workers such as miners participate in this mineral extraction, they do get economic benefit, but then in the same line, they are risking their own health, right? Because they're being exposed to toxic gases, they're being exposed to, toxic work environments. And then once they are no longer useful to this industry, they're discarded, right? They're just left on the side. But then they can't help but participate in this type of line of work. So how do we recompose, or how do we involve workers in this, in our thinking, as we are calling for a more ways that disregards environmental degradation, and we're calling for more, I can't remember, but it says like non-capitalistic, that's the word I was looking for, non-capitalistic extractive ways. But some people economically benefit, even if it's not much, but it's hard to convince people that we need to do away with the system altogether when they are getting some sort of pay from it. So yeah, those are my questions. I hope they were clear. I tried to explain as clear as I could. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. We invite our speakers and audience to engage in dialogue on these important issues. And
May I
now,
ask a
Lucrecia.
question first, please, because you will have the speakers responding.
Of course, Indrani next Lucrecia. Thank you.
Okay, please. Thank you so much. So maybe, and while we are in this conversation, and while Paula spoke about the matricentric, ideology of the non-Western African diaspora in Brazil, and the whole gender question that Annapurna put forward, I'm wondering if it's just loud thinking. I'm wondering if the involvement of men, is it comparatively less in human rights activism because of the individualization that capitalism has put forth, and where men kind of benefit relatively more economically? Is that one of the reasons, or could it be one of the reasons, which kind of is in continuity with what Maxine said, that people are, making money, and the people who seem to be making money are more often than not the men, and the matricentric idea, or the embodiment or continuity of the body and the territorial space which was spoken about was already discussed, which is very much somehow emotionally, I feel it is, and I might be very biased here, but it is more of a woman-centric thought process in the space of caregiving as well. So yeah, so just some loud thoughts and then comments on that. And I also want to pick up Jasmine's idea of the fact somewhere that, in spite of the fact that we are speaking of ecology, most of it is still very human-centric in nature, and not so animal-centric, or looking at ecology from a point of view of, of a more sustainable space for all living beings. So yeah, that is also an interesting thing, and any comments on that would be really welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Indrani, so much. Now I'm giving the floor to Lucrecia, please.
Well, about indigenous knowledges, I was thinking about this idea of stepping on the ground. Is the same I have repeated, but it's not only that idea. I think that indigenous knowledge, the power of indigenous knowledge, is the variation of indigenous knowledge, has to do with, there is not an archive, it has to do with life and land. And this is very important to support that knowledge cannot be transmitted, translated only in these spaces, only with words, but we have to to give life to the places that give life to knowledges. So indigenous knowledges are engaged with this kind of existence in the world. So without them, that is the power that unificates. And this is the space we have to fight for in political spaces. And I think in this way, anthropology can be a company for these struggles, because we are sometimes, or we are looking to being together with the communities, in the communities. And this is linked to the question about women, the question on the fact, the point about women. I think because of they are in the front line, we have discussed about it, because they are involved in care. I think Anacleta, that it's the person of reference we have talked about, started to think about the importance of the struggle, because she didn't want to be She lived in a Black community in which, because of colonization processes, all the future was marked to go to work in the houses of white people or upper classes. So she said, I won't cook in the houses of the others. And she started to fight because she didn't want her children to cook in the houses of the others. So she started thinking about inclusion because of education, but she started to think about maintain to keep the place with this autonomy, with cultural autonomy, with the she wanted to have his specificity of community life, but she didn't want to cook in the houses of others, and she was involved in the daily care of community. And this experience of being women, caring of the next generation, and in the cook space is very important for these women. I remember 3 things that I will tell about Anacleta. One, Anacleta and other defenders. You go to the cooking space. When you visit a community, you go to the cooking space mainly. In the houses of the person of reference that I know, men also are present in the cooking space, but because of this power, because they are companions, how do you say? Companion men, companion person, not companion species, companion human of these women, and they are helping in the cooking space. But the cooking space is very important for it's a place of creation, it's a space of care and of invitation. So they open the cooking space. For me, it is very important. The situations I know, and from this cooking space, for example, Anacleta has told me once I was asking her, what I have to do? Nothing. What I have to do? Dance. What I have to do? Think. She gave the ideas. In this moment, you have to stay. In this moment, you have to dance. In this moment, you have to sing. And I open my cooking space for you. And you are in the step on the ground, you will think about the things. So the way of passing traditional knowledge in the cooking, stepping on the ground, looking of the movement of community, I think it is very important. So we can talk about, it's very important, but you care about the things you are involved in. So I think that traditional knowledge and female knowledge of care are very involved in itself, one with the other. And one more thing. Because of this involvement, very, very hard involvement with care, the women, we have lost, for example, in Marañón, 2 main persons of reference that died of cancer. One was Anacleta and another one was another defender. So they are very involved with care, and they are the first we lost. And this takes me to the last idea, that these persons that suffer from environmental racism, that are placed in zones of sacrifice, and they are the first affected, and are the persons that know, the persons and the communities that know that the affection in one place is for all the world, but the lineal time is so quick for them. Attacks, it has to do with environmental racism. The first to be damaged are the communities, those communities. And the conscious that all the world will be damaged is put in these communities. Is put, I don't know my English, sorry. But there is a lot of conscious about the damage for all the world in these communities, and the women in the front line sometimes pay the consequences. So we lost a lot of women of reference because of their involvement in the struggles. I hope I have been okay.
Thank you so much, Lucre. Gracias. There's a comment in the chat from Paris. I'm going to read it. Unfortunately, I must leave, but I would like to make a short comment about the importance of the long-standing observation of Anthropocene thinkers, that we must put together the many specific actions and spaces, as well as rework global focused perspectives that certainly have enormous consequences for change. Global-centered organizations need to rethink their ideas of security. And maybe Paula, Jasmine, Eugenia want to comment something? We are heading to the end of our meeting.
Yes,
Sorry.
Way about the non-human rights, something about indigenous knowledge. Maybe I can say that it is a practice knowledge. It is a relational knowledge, and I don't see much difference between women's and men here in the north of Argentina, where I'm doing my ethnographic work, because all of them are affected because these territories are sacrificed territories. And so the fight is for the territories, is for both women and men. No? And indigenous knowledge is agency also because of this relation with the territories and the beings inhabited. And also is heterogeneous because include ritual, scientific ideas, techniques ideas, and ethical ideas. No? So that's all.
Sorry, I was responding only to Maxine because mine projects cross the Quilombolas land, and I want her to know about this. And I wrote in there some things about it because it's very important to look the connections between mining in Africa and mining in South America.
Thank you, Lucrecia.
I'd just like to thank you for your papers, and yeah, I don't really have much to comment more on my one, so I think I said everything that was there. Maybe I'm just more inclined maybe to think of how in the global north we could actually what could we do without legal frameworks to move on to practices that would be more reciprocal, and is it an illusion or not? And so it's something that I just leave open. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Yeah.
Maxine wrote a comment. Maxine, would you like to say?
Oh, sorry, it's in response to Dr. Greco's it's just that there's so many similarities, you know, I think in Africa, in South America, you know, in basically colonial projects. I really hate to refer to like my homeland as a colonial project, but this is what it was, right? It was the current state of South Africa is because of, you know, the influences of European settlers. So, but yeah, thank you so much for answering my questions. Thank you. Can I take one last selfie to post on the social media? Oh, I need to just link our social media page. please do follow us. And yeah, thank you so much for this once again. I'm just going to link the Facebook as well as the Instagram.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maxine. Saptarshi wrote also comments. Saptarshi, would you like to say something?
I just said goodbye and thank you and congratulating notes in the comment, but congratulating all of you, the entire team of Anna and Raquel and the presenters. And thank you, Indrani, for collaborating with Human Rights and organizing this wonderful webinar. Along with that, I would like to thanks to our interns like Joyashree and Maxine. And Joyashree made a wonderful thing that they made the wonderful posters, and then Maxine here for controlling the technicality. Thanks. Hope to organize more exciting things in coming future, near future. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you to our speakers, and thank you also to Indrani and Saptarshi who gave the space for us to bring this conversation between different global South perspectives on more than human rights. Thank you very much for your powerful contributions today. We hope this conversation can continue beyond this webinar, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you all.
Yes.